Hi, it's good to be back with you for Sweeter Than Chocolate. Can you believe we're already on week 4 of our 6-week study of Hebrews 11? I love reading your comments on the blog and being able to interact there. And I want you to know that since groups have started at different times, all of the blog discussions are still live. So even if you or your group are a little behind, go ahead and join in. Every time you post to any of the discussion threads, I get an email with your comment so I can check in. So never think that if you get behind, you can't talk with the rest of us. I also want to encourage those of you who are up to date to go back and read through some of the other comments and get in on the discussion and help cheer everyone along. If you have any follow-up questions for me, go ahead and put them up there too. The opportunity to dialogue is one of the great things about this kind of study. I'm throwing some questions out there, but you can too. And we've had some good interaction going on, but there is room for more. So much for the housekeeping details. Let's get back to the book. Now, up until this week, the author of Hebrews has been moving forward at a pretty comfortable pace. God, creation, Abel, Enoch, Noah, Abraham and Sarah, Isaac, Jacob, Moses. Each of the people listed have made sense. Nobody perfect, of course, but all with good credentials. And as we consider the scope of the Old Testament story and fill in the blanks with Hebrews 11 as our outline, we can think through it something like this. God, before all else, creates Adam and Eve. They fall. People go from bad to worse up until the time of the flood, where Noah is the main character on the scene. Now, between Adam and Noah, we have the righteous standouts of Abel and Enoch. But the big building blocks, the ones we really want to remember, are Adam at creation and Noah at the flood. After Noah, onto the scene comes Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. Now, call me shallow if you want, but I am always on the lookout for how to remember facts. I want you to think for a second about how pop culture has taken to merging the names of dating stars from 2 into 1. Think Brangelina, you know what I'm saying? We can do them one better with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. This is a grouping of 3 that shows up together in Scripture all the time. God is often referred to as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now here are just a few brief facts on these 3. Abraham is the first person we ever hear paired up with the term Hebrew. Isaac is the son of the promise. And Jacob, who's the twin of Esau, is the one who has his name changed to Israel. And it's from him that the nation today gets her name. So remember, while all of Abraham's children are Hebrews, they're not all Israelites. Not all of Isaac's children are Israelites. Israelites, according to the flesh, descend from Jacob. Where does the term Jewish come from? Well, it comes a little further down the line from the name of Jacob's son Judah. But that's a little more complicated and a discussion for another day. Now Jacob, who we've just said is now known as Israel, becomes the father of the 12 tribes. He and his family follow his son Joseph into Egypt as a small tribe of people, and over 400 years later they follow Moses out of Egypt as a nation. Last week we considered the life of Moses. And the author of Hebrews takes 7 verses to unpack Moses and trace his life of faith, which, while not perfect, was exemplary nonetheless. And up to this point, the faithful of Hebrews 11 have been exemplary. I mean, who's got an issue with Abel or Enoch or Abraham? Sure, no human being is perfect, but these guys, they're the real deal. Even Sarah, I'm sure we've got the whole Hagar thing, but this woman follows her husband on the road trip of a lifetime and truly considers God faithful. We've got stars up to this point. And then all of a sudden this week, we meet up with a really strange crowd of faith characters. With Moses, we've just covered the time, again, from the Exodus out of Egypt through the wilderness years And now, with the nation of Israel poised on the edge of the promised land, we expect to hear the name Joshua as the next in our list of people of faith. Joshua, the servant of Moses from his youth. Joshua, the good spy. Joshua, God's warrior. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord, Joshua. And Caleb, where's Caleb? Caleb, who played Robin to Joshua's Batman. The other good spy. Caleb, who had a different spirit and who God said followed the Lord fully. And remember, that was over the years and years and years in the midst of a grumbling multitude. Caleb, who at 85 years old asks for his inheritance to be in the hill country. The best country to have, but the hardest country to take. But neither of the good spies are named in Hebrews 11. And while we're on the topic of who you'd expect, what about Deborah? Not only a judge of Israel, but the first prophet mentioned since Moses. And a woman who rose up as a mother in Israel when no one else wanted to stand, including the guy who does get a mention. So, as the author of Hebrews picks up speed, we find ourselves at a juncture where we don't exactly get what we might have been expecting. At Jericho, instead of Joshua and Caleb, we get Rahab. And as the book of Judges opens, instead of Deborah, we get Barak and the boys. Now, even though they go unnamed, we know that Joshua and Caleb and Deborah were people of great faith. But this other group, well, they make the faith chapter. They've got some, well, history. The text tells us Rahab was a harlot. And you studied about the boys this week. Gideon, who started off hiding and fearful, and ended up perhaps a little full of himself in naming his son Abimelech, which translates to, "My father is king." Barak, who wouldn't go to battle without Deborah. And this in a culture that would not think having a Sarah Palin or a Hillary Clinton as a running mate would be cool. Jephthah, who made a rash vow and ended up, in one way or another, sacrificing his only daughter. And Samson, who, how do you put this, spent a lot more time chasing the seen than the unseen. And yet, who shows up in Hebrews 11, warts and all? Rahab, Gideon, Barak, Jephthah, and Samson. If you miss everything else I say today, don't miss this. Flawed people cannot thwart the plans of a perfect God. And there is freedom in this, my friend. There's freedom for the person who fears they have too much baggage for God to carry. Let me tell you something. The airlines may charge you extra for a suitcase that's too heavy, but God does not have a problem with the weight of your baggage. Jesus came to rescue sinners. He was always in trouble with the religious types for spending too much time with the tax collectors and prostitutes and other sinners. I love how my pastor Joe puts it. When he describes the church, he says, it is a hospital for sinners. And I know that's not a politically correct term, but it is a biblically correct one. You think you have a past? Rahab had a past. Doesn't matter what's in your past. The anger, the divorce, the abortion, the affair, the addiction, the worry, the lies, the failure of whatever sort. God is in the business of cleaning up the past. Rahab not only gets props in Hebrews 11, she also ends up in the genealogy of Jesus Christ and is the other mother-in-law of Ruth. We always hear about Ruth and Naomi, but the mom of Boaz was Rahab. Rahab's baggage was not too much for God, and neither is yours. There's also freedom for the person who fears they are not quite enough. Have you ever felt not quite big enough? not quite prepared enough, not quite enough for God's service. We've already seen that in Moses, and we see it again in both Gideon and Barak. Neither was thrilled about the missions they were called to. Barak wanted Deborah to join him, and Gideon kept asking for confirmation again and again. Neither thought they were enough for the job, and yet God delivered his people through them anyhow. And while we don't hear of any negative fallout on the Barak story, we just know the honor went to a woman instead of him. With Gideon, we see some messes happening along the way. You know, sometimes we can get ourselves so bound up in the what if I mess up thing that we never obey in the first place. Now, somewhere along the line, Gideon got a little full of himself, and he didn't finish as well as we might have hoped. Too many wives, along with the unwitting introduction of some idolatry, and Gideon left a bit of a mess behind him. That mess brought some consequences for his family and his country. But don't miss this. God still accomplished his purposes. Finally, there's freedom for the person who fears other people aren't enough. Ever been there? I tell you, the world is made up of fallen people, and they are sitting next to you in church too. I'll be honest with you. There are times when, quite frankly, I sit back and look at the situations in the church at large, and I think, how are we not going to ruin this whole thing? And if a particular face just popped into your head, you probably struggle with the same thing. And yet, in spite of us all, God is faithful to continue his work, to bring sin to light, and to work through the flawed people that he is slowly but surely conforming to the image of his Son. If God could work through Jephthah and Samson, if he could work through Peter, who is walking on water one minute, lopping a guy's ear off the next, and then running with his tail between his legs like a scared puppy, he can work through anyone he chooses. He is big enough, he is God enough to empower and protect his church. Now, if you're in a group, I'd like you to take some time to discuss which of the judges' stories impacted your thinking the most and explain to each other why that is. I'd also like you to consider how the truths of God's work through the judges, of all people, can free you to serve with greater confidence. Has God prompted you toward any specific service recently? If not, that's okay. But if so, that would also be a good thing to discuss. And before you wrap up your time together, be sure to post your response to either or both of these questions so we can all dialogue a bit together. I'll never forget the first precept class that I taught. I was 31 years old and scared to death. It was a class of about 40 women, and I was younger than all but 2 of the people in the class. Talk about being afraid of tanking. I would seriously arrive at the church about 7:30 in the morning for a 9 o'clock class so I could go into the gym and shoot baskets just to calm myself down. I just shoot baskets and recite from the book of Hebrews and pray that when class rolled around that I'd just be able to breathe. I felt far too small for the job. I was afraid I was going to mess it up. But you know what? I knew God had called me to do it. And I started learning firsthand that God works through imperfect people. Do you believe that? My friend, we are not to be living lives of spiritual paralysis and fear. We can move forward in full obedience, trusting that even when we're not enough, He is.